The silence that night was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that draped over the streets of St. Louis, Missouri, a silence pregnant with unspoken fear and an impending horror. The rhythmic hum of distant sirens, a familiar lament in the city's heart, was strangely absent, leaving only the whisper of a late summer breeze rustling through aging oak leaves, carrying with it the scent of impending tragedy, a premonition of irreversible loss. It was August 15th, 1996, and the humid air clung to everything, a suffocating embrace, much like the indelible memory of what was about to unfold would cling to the collective soul of a community for over 20 years, a tormenting shadow refusing to dissipate. Inside a modest two-story brick apartment building on Del Mar Boulevard, amidst the fading echoes of daytime traffic and the distant murmur of neighborhood life, a life, vibrant and full of artistic promise, was about to be extinguished, leaving behind a void that would defy simple explanation, a complex puzzle that would torment detectives and loved ones alike, and a justice that would meticulously elude capture for an agonizingly long passage of time. Tonight, we unearth the chilling narrative of a cold case that gripped a city, a brutal murder that tore at the very fabric of a tight-knit community, forcing its residents to question everything they thought they knew about their neighbors and their safety. Tonight, we speak of the astonishing, stunning revelation years later that shattered all preconceived notions and ripped open old wounds. Tonight, we ask, how much darkness can one heart truly conceal, and what unbearable truths lie beneath the surface of what we perceive as normal? Where are you watching this story from? Perhaps from a quiet room or bustling city? And what profound echoes does it stir within you as you listen? If these tales of profound mystery and the exploration of human darkness resonate with your own search for understanding, please consider taking a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your invaluable support not only helps us immensely, but it also enables us to continue bringing more meticulously researched stories like this one to light, delving fearlessly into the deepest shadows where truth often hides, waiting patiently, sometimes for decades, to finally be found and acknowledged. The victim was Simone Dubois, a name that still whispers through the alleyways and front porches of the Fountain Park neighborhood, carried on the occasional breath of wind or in the hushed tones of older residents recounting a bygone era. At just 23 years old, Simone was not merely a young woman. She was a beacon of light, a prodigious talent whose hands, stained often with the vibrant hues of oil paint or the rich darkness of charcoal, created art that spoke volumes, echoing her inner world with every delicate stroke. Her small apartment, nestled on the second floor of a building whose brick facade had weathered decades of St. Louis summers and winters, was more than just a living space. It was a sanctuary, a crucible of creativity where canvases, some freshly stretched and primed, others bearing the nascent stages of a new vision, leaned casually against sun-drenched walls. Tubes of oil paint, a rainbow of potential, lay scattered across a worn wooden table, amidst brushes caked with dried pigment, and the faint, lingering yet intoxicating scent of turpentine mingled subtly with the comforting fragrance of vanilla, her favorite candle. This was her universe, a reflection of her boundless spirit. Simone had moved to St. Louis from rural Mississippi 3 years prior, drawn by the burgeoning art scene, the city's rich musical heritage, and the tantalizing promise of a fresh start, a larger canvas for her ambitions. She worked part-time at a local community center, a vibrant hub of activity for the neighborhood's youth, teaching art classes to children who adored her gentle demeanor, her patient guidance, and her infectious, seemingly endless enthusiasm. She worked part-time at a local community center, a vibrant hub of activity for the neighborhood's youth, teaching art classes to children who adored her gentle demeanor, her patient guidance, and her infectious, seemingly endless enthusiasm. Her dreams were modest yet profound, to eventually open her own small gallery, to inspire young minds to discover their own creative voices, and to ultimately leave a mark not just on canvas, but on the lives of those around her, enriching her community. She was deeply embedded in the local Black community, a regular and devout attendee at the Fountain Park Baptist Church, her melodic voice often joining the choir, and a vocal, passionate advocate for local youth programs, believing profoundly in the transformative power of art and education. Her presence was a comforting, familiar fixture, a thread woven tightly into the vibrant tapestry of neighborhood life, and her absence, even before it was confirmed, began to tear at that fabric. The evening of August 15th began like any other ordinary day, a mundane precursor to an extraordinary horror. Simone had finished teaching her evening art class, the final bell of the community center echoing with the playful shouts of children. She had shared encouraging, affirming words with a shy 7-year-old girl named Maya, whose charcoal drawing of a sunflower, after many frustrated attempts, had finally beautifully captured its vibrant essence and its hopeful posture. As the last child scampered off into the warm summer evening, Simone gathered her belongings and began her walk home, a familiar, comforting journey along tree-lined streets where old Victorian houses stood sentinel. The setting sun cast long, orange shadows across the sidewalks, painting the city in hues that always inspired her, a fleeting palette she yearned to capture. She called her mother, Clara, back in Mississippi, around 8:30 p.m., a sacred ritual they cherished, a lifeline connecting their hearts across state lines. Clara would later recall the conversation as a light, typical, filled with Simone's usual bright optimism, and updates on a new painting she was excited about, a cityscape of St. Paul. Louis rendered in deep blues and purples, capturing the city's nocturnal magic. Simone spoke of plans for the upcoming weekend, a possible exploratory trip to the St. Louis Art Museum to sketch, and a casual get-together with friends at a new jazz club she had heard about. There was no hint of unease in her voice, no tremor of fear, no subtle shift in her mood, nothing to suggest the unimaginable terror that lay just hours ahead, patiently waiting. The call ended with her usual affectionate farewell. "I love you, Mama. Talk to you Saturday." Those would be the last heartbreaking words Clara Dubois would ever hear from her cherished daughter, an echo that would haunt her dreams for decades. At approximately 11:45 p.m., Marcus Thorne, Simone's boyfriend of 2 years, arrived at her apartment. Marcus, a charismatic and ambitious young man in his mid-20s, working as a diligent manager at a local electronics store, had a key to Simone's place, a symbol of their shared intimacy and future plans. They had made plans to watch a late-night movie, perhaps a classic film Simone loved, and to discuss their upcoming anniversary, a milestone they both anticipated. As he inserted his key into the cold metal lock, an unsettling stillness permeated the humid night air, a strange, unnatural quiet that immediately caught his attention. The usual faint sounds of Simone's stereo, perhaps the smooth notes of jazz or the soulful rhythms of neo-soul she often listened to while painting, were conspicuously absent. The small porch light above the door, which Simone meticulously and habitually left on for safety and as a welcoming beacon, was eerily off, shrouded in darkness. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down Marcus's spine, despite the warm night, a premonition he later described to police as a sick feeling in his gut, a sudden, inexplicable dread. He pushed the heavy wooden door open, the creak of the hinges sounding unusually loud, and called out Simone's name, his voice echoing unnaturally in the sudden, vast, cavernous silence of the living room, a silence that devoured his words. The apartment was dark, save for the faint, pale glow of a distant street lamp filtering weakly through the closed blinds, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms. Marcus fumbled frantically for the light switch near the door, his hand trembling slightly, his fingers slick with a sudden cold sweat. The sudden flood of illumination, harsh and unforgiving, revealed a scene of horrifying disarray that ripped away any lingering hope. Canvases, some still bearing fresh paint, lay overturned on the floor, their artistic aspirations crushed. A delicate ceramic vase, a gift from Clara, shattered into countless glittering shards, reflecting the harsh light, its beauty irrevocably broken. A dining chair was toppled, lying grotesquely on its side. And then his eyes fixated on a single, vibrant tube of cadmium red paint, not squeezed onto a clean artist's palette, but onto the cream-colored carpet, a stark, crimson stain spreading outwards like a morbid, grotesque flower, a pool of thick, viscous color that seemed to mock the vibrant life it represented. Panic, cold and all-consuming, seized Marcus, squeezing his chest with an icy grip. He rushed through the small apartment, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of pure terror. The kitchen, oddly, appeared undisturbed, its neatness a cruel contrast to the chaos. The bathroom was empty, its tiled surfaces gleaming unnervingly. Then, with a rising sense of dread, he reached the bedroom, pushing open the slightly ajar door. The sight that greeted him in Simone's bedroom was one that would forever be seared into his memory, a tableau of unimaginable violence, despair, and crushing finality. Simone lay sprawled on the floor beside her bed, her delicate frame oddly twisted, contorted, a silent, macabre puppet robbed of all grace. The air was thick, heavy with the coppery, metallic stench of fresh blood, a smell that would cling to his clothes and his nightmares, and something else, something acrid and primal, like fear itself, had a tangible, suffocating odor. Her eyes, once so full of life, of artistic vision, of boundless dreams, stared blankly upwards, glazed and empty, fixed on a ceiling she would never again truly see, never again find inspiration in. A crimson stain, shockingly vivid against the gentle fabric, bloomed across the front of her favorite blue silk nightgown, a stark, violent contrast that screamed of brutality. Her right hand was still clenched, a small silver locket, a cherished gift from her mother, clasped tightly in her lifeless fingers, a final, poignant grip on a tangible memory. Marcus recoiled violently, a guttural cry tearing from deep within his throat, a sound of pure anguish, horror, and profound disbelief. He stumbled backwards, tripping over a discarded shoe, falling clumsily, his mind refusing to process the brutal, undeniable reality before him. He scrambled for his cell phone, his fingers slick with sweat, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps, and with immense effort dialed 911. The call, recorded and preserved in police archives, captures the raw, unfiltered terror of a man discovering the unthinkable, his world irrevocably shattered. His voice, once smooth, confident, and articulate, was now a choked, broken whisper, almost unrecognizable, dissolving into incoherent pleas for help. The arrival of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department shattered the quiet sanctity of Fountain Park. The pulsing red and blue lights of patrol cars and ambulances cast dancing, spectral shadows against the darkened brick apartment building, an unsettling ballet that seemed to mock the stillness of death within. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, hardened by years of witnessing human suffering, quickly secured the scene, establishing a perimeter. Detectives, more seasoned, their expressions already hardening with a professional, clinical resolve, arrived shortly thereafter, their movements deliberate and heavy with the weight of experience, with each step they took inside the apartment. Detective Miller, a veteran with 2 decades on the force, his face etched with the weariness of too many unsolved cases, and his younger, more idealistic partner, Detective Evans, were assigned to the case. The initial assessment was grim, unequivocally pointing to foul play. Simone Dubois had been stabbed multiple times, a brutal, frenzied attack. Defensive wounds, raw and deep, were visibly apparent on her forearms, on her hands, indicating a desperate, valiant struggle for life against her assailant. The murder weapon, a sharp, thin blade, was conspicuously absent, not found anywhere at the scene, adding another layer of complexity. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no pried locks, no splintered door frames, immediately suggesting Simone knew her assailant or had, terrifyingly, let them in willingly, perhaps even unsuspectingly. The apartment, while tragically ransacked in the living room and bedroom with overturned furniture and scattered personal items, showed no obvious signs of theft of valuables. Her wallet, containing a small amount of cash, was found untouched on her kitchen counter, her beloved stereo and television still in place. This crucial detail immediately shifted the motive away from a simple robbery gone wrong, away from a random act of violence, pointing instead to something far more personal, far more sinister, a crime born of intimate rage or chilling calculation. The neighborhood, normally a hub of activity even late into the night, with porch lights glowing and the distant sound of music, became unnaturally hushed, shrouded in a blanket of collective grief and mounting fear. Neighbors, drawn by the flashing lights, peered from behind drawn curtains, their faces etched with a mixture of terror, sorrow, and simmering outrage. The news, as grim news often does, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit Black community, carried on whispers and hushed phone calls. Simone Dubois, the sweet artist, the community's hope, the symbol of aspiration, gone. The shock was palpable, a collective gasp that reverberated through every home, every church, every corner store. Marcus Thorne, still reeling from the horrific discovery, his eyes red-rimmed and vacant, was taken to the police station for immediate questioning. His grief was profound, evident in every tremor of his voice, every broken word, his story agonizingly consistent. He arrived, found her, called 911. He meticulously recounted their last phone call, their shared plans for the evening, and his chilling premonition of dread. He provided a clear, verifiable alibi for the hours leading up to the discovery. He had been working late at the electronics store, then stopped for gas on his way to Simone's, details later corroborated by his vigilant manager and a gas station receipt found in his wallet. He was cooperative, perhaps too cooperative, but visibly traumatized, breaking down repeatedly during the emotional interview, tears streaming down his face as he recounted the gruesome scene. Detectives, while maintaining a professional and outwardly sympathetic demeanor, kept a necessary distance. Anyone who discovers a body, particularly a romantic partner, is naturally, and often regrettably, a person of initial interest, a standard procedure in any homicide investigation. The early days of the investigation were frantic, a blur of ceaseless activity, a desperate race against time before critical evidence faded. Door-knocking expeditions became a relentless routine, interviews stretched into the small hours, and forensic analysis unfolded with agonizing slowness. Crime scene technicians, clad in their pristine white suits, meticulously scoured every inch of Simone's apartment, a silent ballet of focused determination. They dusted every surface for fingerprints, collected minute fiber samples from the carpet and furniture, and photographed every minute detail, every speck of dust, every shadow, hoping to capture the invisible traces of the killer. They found several partial fingerprints that didn't belong to Simone or Marcus, tantalizing but frustratingly incomplete, none complete enough for a definitive match in the existing limited databases of 1996. A single strand of dark, coarse hair, clearly foreign to Simone's soft, curly texture, was discovered clutched in her right hand, intertwined with her own hair, a silent testament to her desperate final struggle. This was a crucial piece of physical evidence, a potential golden thread. Yet in 1996, DNA technology was still in its nascent stages for forensic identification, especially from such a small, degraded sample, making immediate identification a remote possibility. They collected blood samples, painstakingly noting the spray patterns that suggested the brutal, furious nature of the attack, the trajectory of the blows. Underneath Simone's fingernails, minute fragments of skin and fabric were painstakingly collected, silent witnesses to her desperate fight for life, her desperate attempt to leave a mark on her assailant. The medical examiner's report confirmed death by multiple catastrophic stab wounds, ruling out sexual assault, but highlighting the extreme personal violence inflicted. The lingering absence of forced entry continued to deeply puzzle and frustrate investigators, echoing a silent, ominous question: who did she let in? The community, grappling with the unthinkable, reacted with a mixture of profound, soul-deep grief and simmering, righteous anger. Vigils were held nightly in Fountain Park, a solemn procession of residents gathering, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames of countless candles, defiant stars against the encroaching darkness of sorrow. The community, grappling with the unthinkable, reacted with a mixture of profound, soul-deep grief and simmering, righteous anger. Vigils were held nightly in Fountain Park, a solemn procession of residents gathering, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames of countless candles, defiant stars against the encroaching darkness of sorrow. Simone's mother, Clara, arrived from Mississippi, her eyes swollen almost shut from endless tears, her voice a raw, broken whisper of unimaginable pain, her spirit crushed. She appealed to the public through tear-filled press conferences, begging, pleading for anyone with even the smallest piece of information to come forward, to ease her torment. The local Black leaders, including the revered Reverend James Henderson of Fountain Park Baptist, condemned the senseless violence with fiery sermons and passionate speeches, demanding swift, unequivocal justice. They organized rallies and protests, their voices rising in a collective cry, calling for increased police attention and resources to crimes in their neighborhoods, often feeling marginalized, overlooked, and underserved by an indifferent law enforcement system. The deeply held sentiment was that if this brutal crime had happened in a more affluent, predominantly white neighborhood, the investigative resources and the urgency would be far greater, the political pressure immense. This deep-seated distrust of authority, a generational burden, only compounded the tragedy, turning grief into bitter resentment. Initial suspect profiles, based on the limited evidence and witness accounts, began to emerge, forming shadowy possibilities in the detectives' minds. The police questioned several individuals from Simone's wider orbit, a disgruntled former art student who had exhibited obsessive, unsettling behavior towards her, leaving her unnerved by his intensity, a cantankerous neighbor who had reportedly argued loudly with Simone over loud music emanating from her apartment, a minor but heated dispute, and a shadowy figure, vaguely described by a few residents, seen lurking suspiciously near her apartment complex in the days before the murder, described merely as a stranger to the block, an unknown variable. However, with each diligent follow-up, each lead eventually dissolved into nothingness. The former student had a verifiable, solid alibi for the night of the murder, placing him far away from St. Louis. The neighbor's argument with Simone was indeed minor, resolved days before the tragedy, and he too had a credible alibi. The elusive stranger proved to be a transient passing through the area, cleared after extensive questioning and a complete lack of any direct, tangible connection to Simone or the crime. The investigative team, despite their best, exhaustive efforts, found themselves hitting brick walls, each avenue leading to a frustrating dead end. The more they delved, the murkier the waters became, each piece of information adding more questions than answers. The initial rush of potential information dried up, replaced by a chilling, impenetrable silence from potential witnesses, perhaps out of fear of retribution or a genuine, heartbreaking lack of knowledge. Detective Miller, a man already weighed down by the city's ceaseless, brutal wave of violence that seemed to consume lives with shocking regularity, found himself particularly haunted by Simone's case. Her vibrant spirit, her youthful promise, the senseless, extreme brutality of her death, and the palpable anguish of the community resonated deeply with him, stirring a sense of injustice that gnawed at his core. He spent countless solitary nights poring over every page of the burgeoning case files, reviewing minute details in autopsy reports, meticulously re-interviewing witnesses, listening again to recorded statements, trying desperately to find that one elusive thread, that single overlooked detail that could unravel the entire mystery. He focused heavily on the absence of forced entry, a detail that screamed of intimacy, or at the very least familiarity. Who would Simone let into her apartment late at night? Her boyfriend? Yes. Her closest friends? Perhaps. But the initial interviews with Marcus Thorne seemed to hold up under scrutiny. His grief at the time felt undeniably genuine, his pain raw and exposed. Could it be someone else in her close circle, someone less obvious, someone carefully hidden in plain sight? The small silver locket clutched in her hand also intrigued him, a silent, cryptic message. Was it a desperate attempt to protect a cherished item? A final act of clinging to a memory? Or a last symbolic gesture, perhaps a clue meant for those who would follow? The locket itself, meticulously examined by forensics, offered no hidden compartment, no secret inscription that pointed directly to an assailant, just the faint outline of a faded photograph inside, too degraded to decipher. But the feeling, that unsettling, nagging feeling, persisted. The years passed with the inexorable march of time, turning weeks into months, months into a decade, then 2 agonizing decades, each one deepening the ache of the unresolved. Simone Dubois's murder became a grim entry in the overflowing cold case files of the St. Louis PD, a persistent, throbbing ache in the collective heart of St. Louis. Louis. The Fountain Park neighborhood, though slowly rebuilding, its resilient spirit refusing to be entirely crushed, never fully shed the long, oppressive shadow of that terrifying August night. Her parents aged, their once vibrant spirits dimmed by an enduring grief, their hope for justice flickering like a fragile candle flame, but never, miraculously, fully extinguishing. Marcus Thorne, initially under a cloud of unspoken suspicion, as is often the case with romantic partners, had moved on, at least outwardly. He had created a successful foundation in Simone's name, dedicated to supporting young artists and advocating for other cold case victims, transforming his grief into action. He became a respected figure in the community, his name synonymous with resilience and the tireless pursuit of justice. His public persona was one of enduring grief, profound loss, and tireless dedication to finding answers for families like Simone's, families whose loved ones were also trapped in the purgatory of unsolved crime. He spoke eloquently at countless rallies, his voice often hoarse with emotion, his eyes often welling with genuine-seeming tears as he recounted his personal loss, his broken dreams. He became a symbol of resilience, a testament to enduring love and the unwavering fight for justice in the face of overwhelming odds. For many, his transformation from a grieving boyfriend to a revered community advocate was inspiring, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to find purpose in pain. For a few, however, particularly the now retired Detective Miller, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of doubt, however unfair or unprovable it seemed, remained stubbornly planted in the back of his mind. Not concrete evidence, merely a gut feeling, a slight, almost unquantifiable incongruity in a narrative that, in its perfection, seemed almost too perfectly tragic, too neatly packaged. Then, 2 decades later, a new wave of revolutionary forensic technology swept through police departments across the nation, offering a glimmer of hope to families who had long despaired. In 2017, the St. Louis Police Department's cold case unit, now invigorated and led by Detective Evans, Miller having retired, though still informally consulted on particularly challenging cases, decided to re-examine several high-profile unsolved murders. Simone Dubois is among them, recognizing the advancements in science could potentially crack these long-standing enigmas. The single strand of dark hair found clutched in Simone's hand, preserved meticulously and carefully cataloged since that fateful night in 1996, became the immediate focus of intense, renewed scrutiny. Advancements in mitochondrial DNA sequencing, a technique capable of analyzing even degraded or minute samples of hair, blood, or tissue, offered a breakthrough previously unimaginable. The initial tests yielded a remarkably clear genetic profile, a distinct and unambiguous genetic signature. The next logical step was to run this profile through national databases, but also to carefully and systematically consider all individuals who had been a part of Simone's life, however peripherally. The hair, after careful measurement, was determined to be too long to belong to Marcus, who consistently kept his hair closely cropped. It also didn't match any of the initial suspects who had been cleared in 1996. The DNA analysis confirmed it was unequivocally male, adding another piece to the complex puzzle. Simultaneously, almost miraculously, a new piece of information emerged from the depths of the archive, almost accidentally. A retired crime scene technician performing a routine, final sort-through of old evidence logs and forgotten reports before his permanent departure from the department, discovered a forgotten detail from the 1996 scene, a tiny, almost microscopic blood smear found on the underside of Simone's bedroom windowsill, a detail so minute it was easily missed during the initial, less sophisticated sweep of the crime scene with the technology available at the time. This smear, unlike the copious amounts of blood found inside the apartment, which spoke of the brutal attack, was remarkably small, almost like an accidental brush, a momentary touch. It was painstakingly collected, recatalogued, and sent for immediate testing. And incredibly, to the astonishment of the cold case unit, it yielded a full, robust DNA profile, distinct from the hair sample and unequivocally male. This discovery was a critical, game-changing turning point, a seismic shift in the investigation. Now, they had 2 distinct male DNA profiles from the scene, providing new, tangible avenues for inquiry. One, the hair, presumably from the direct assailant. The other, the blood smear, possibly from someone who was either present or had touched the window at some point, perhaps trying to enter or exit, or even, more chillingly, trying to manipulate the scene. Detective Evans and his dedicated team began the painstaking, arduous process of comparing these newly extracted DNA profiles against all individuals who had been involved in Simone's life and the original investigation. Family members, close friends, distant neighbors, even the original detectives were all respectfully asked to provide fresh DNA samples voluntarily, or their existing samples, if available, were meticulously reanalyzed using the advanced technology. The results began to trickle in from the state lab, each one meticulously reviewed, cross-referenced, and debated by the team. The hair sample, the primary clue from what they presumed to be the actual assailant, continued to produce no immediate match in national criminal databases, a frustrating and unexpected setback that momentarily dampened spirits. But the blood sample from the windowsill, that was a profoundly different story, one that would rewrite the entire narrative. One afternoon, the lab report for the windowsill blood arrived, stamped with an urgent, ominous red notification, immediately catching Detective Evans's eye. The DNA profile from the tiny blood smear on the windowsill matched a name that sent a collective icy shiver through the entire cold case unit, a name that seemed impossible, unthinkable: Marcus Thorne. The very man who had discovered Simone's brutally murdered body, the grieving boyfriend, the tireless advocate for justice, the symbol of resilience in the community, had his DNA inexplicably at the scene, not just inside the apartment where he claimed to have found her, but uniquely, chillingly, on the underside of an exterior windowsill. The discovery was shattering, a blow that reverberated through the very foundations of the case. Marcus had always maintained, consistently and unequivocally, that he never entered the apartment through the window, nor did he ever cut himself on any window frame, especially not an exterior one. The blood could not have been from his initial frantic entry through the front door, nor could it be explained by any innocent scenario he had ever provided. It pointed instead to something far more sinister, something calculated, something profoundly deceptive. The revelation was met first with stunned disbelief, then with a cold, sickening certainty that settled deep in the pit of their stomachs. The police had to reevaluate everything they thought they knew, every single piece of information gathered over 2 decades, through this horrifying new lens. Marcus Thorne, the public face of the Simone Dubois Cold Case Foundation, the man who had championed her memory, was now undeniably the prime suspect. Detective Evans, remembering his retired mentor Miller's subtle, almost intuitive doubts, those tiny, unquantifiable incongruities, felt a chilling, vindicating confirmation that sent a wave of unease through him. They immediately obtained a warrant for Marcus's arrest, proceeding quietly and discreetly to avoid tipping him off, knowing the magnitude of the impending public reaction. The scene of his arrest, just 2 blocks from Simone's old apartment, where he was speaking eloquently at a community remembrance event for cold case victims, a place he had transformed into a symbol of hope, was utterly surreal, almost a theatrical performance of cruel irony. The shock on the faces of the community members present, those who had admired and supported him for so long, was absolute, devastating. A collective gasp, then murmurs, then outright cries of disbelief and anguish erupted from the crowd. "Not Marcus! It can't be!" echoed through the bewildered crowd, a chorus of shattered faith. But the cold, metallic click of the handcuffs, a definitive, undeniable sound, sealed his fate and ignited a firestorm of painful questions that would engulf the community for months to come. The arrest of Marcus Thorne sent shockwaves through the Black community of St. Louis, reverberating far beyond the city limits, shaking its foundations. This was not just another arrest. It was a profound, soul-deep betrayal of the highest order, a violation of trust that cut deeper than any knife. Marcus was not merely a grieving boyfriend in the eyes of the community. He had meticulously cultivated himself into a trusted figure, a powerful voice for the voiceless, a powerful symbol of hope and resilience in a community perpetually scarred by systemic violence and pervasive injustice. He had sat on countless community panels, lobbied politicians tirelessly for increased resources, and intimately comforted other bereaved families, his shoulder always available for tears, all while, allegedly, harboring the darkest, most monstrous of secrets within his own heart. The news spread like wildfire through social media, exploded across local and national news channels, and fueled whispered conversations on stoops, in barbershops, and during solemn church services. People felt a deep, personal sense of violation, as if their collective trust, their shared grief, had been deliberately exploited, cruelly manipulated for 2 agonizing decades. The investigators, now with Marcus in custody, painstakingly began to piece together a new, horrifying narrative, re-examining every minute detail of the original case through this profoundly altered lens. The lack of forced entry, once a frustrating enigma, suddenly took on a profoundly different, chilling meaning. Simone had not been the victim of a random intruder. She had, terrifyingly, let him in, opening her door to her killer. The perplexing absence of stolen valuables, the intensely personal nature of the attack, the sheer number of stab wounds, it all now pointed unequivocally to an intimate crime, a brutal act of passion, or perhaps a cold, calculated rage. The defensive wounds on Simone's forearms, once a testament to her fight, now indicated a desperate struggle against someone she perhaps trusted implicitly, someone she never, in her wildest nightmares, expected to turn on her with such savage brutality. The single strand of foreign hair, previously a frustrating mystery, now became the new, urgent target for comparison, a potential missing link. Could it belong to Marcus? Or was there another accomplice, another layer to this already devastating tragedy, a darker conspiracy lurking beneath the surface? The detectives began to delve deeper into Marcus Thorne's carefully constructed past, seeking any subtle cracks, any hidden fissures in his meticulously crafted public persona. Initially, they found no prior criminal record, no documented history of violence, no obvious red flags that would have immediately pointed to him in 1996, reinforcing the image of a clean, upstanding citizen. He was, by all outward accounts, a model citizen, a diligent hard worker, a devoted boyfriend, a man above reproach. But as they peeled back the layers, interviewing people again, a more nuanced, disturbing picture began, slowly, to emerge. Friends and acquaintances, initially hesitant, now re-interviewed after Marcus's shocking arrest, began to recall subtle details, inconsistencies, and uneasy moments they had dismissed at the time as merely symptoms of profound grief or stress. One friend, under careful questioning, mentioned Marcus's possessiveness, a subtly controlling streak he occasionally displayed toward Simone, often cleverly disguised as protectiveness or concern for her well-being. Another spoke, reluctantly, of Simone expressing anxieties about Marcus's temper, particularly when he drank alcohol, an issue she rarely mentioned publicly, keeping it close to her chest. But the most crucial revelation came from Simone's best friend, Keisha, a woman who had carried a painful, heavy secret for 2 decades. Keisha tearfully confided that Marcus was growing increasingly jealous of Simone's burgeoning artistic aspirations, seeing her growing independence, her increasing dedication to her craft, her dreams of a life beyond St. Louis as a direct threat to their relationship, to his control. Keisha had kept this painful, dangerous secret for 2 decades, afraid to speak ill of the grieving boyfriend, the community hero, but now the dam of silence broke under the pressure of justice. Keisha revealed in gut-wrenching detail that just weeks before Simone's brutal death, Simone had been seriously contemplating breaking up with Marcus. She felt increasingly suffocated by his subtle expectations, his unspoken demands that her vibrant, independent life revolve primarily, if not exclusively, around him and his needs. She yearned to pursue an art scholarship in New York City, a long-held dream Marcus had actively and subtly discouraged, dismissing it as fanciful, impractical, and childish, preferring she stay in St. Louis, settle down, and marry him. Simone had begun to quietly, secretly plan her departure, diligently saving money from her part-time job, discreetly researching art programs in New York, and making tentative inquiries about living arrangements. This revelation, devastating in its simplicity, transformed the initial, unprovable crime of passion into a cold, calculated act of desperate, furious control, a monstrous act designed to prevent Simone from leaving him, from pursuing a life he could not dominate, a future he could not control. The investigation now focused with renewed, intense precision on the 2 distinct DNA profiles found at the scene. The blood from the windowsill unequivocally, undeniably linked to Marcus Thorne, a forensic fact that pierced through any lingering doubt. But what about the hair found clutched in Simone's lifeless hand? If Marcus was indeed the sole killer, as the mounting evidence suggested, why would there be 2 distinct male DNA profiles, and why would the hair not match him? This became the new central enigma, adding another layer of unsettling complexity to an already convoluted dark case. Further sophisticated DNA testing revealed the hair belonged to a distant cousin of Marcus Thorne, a man named Samuel "Sammy" Ellis, who had a minor rap sheet for petty theft and drug possession, but crucially, no history of violent crime. Sammy had been a peripheral acquaintance of Simone's, occasionally visiting Marcus at her apartment, sometimes helping with odd jobs. He had never been a primary suspect in 1996, his name barely a footnote in the initial reports. Marcus have had an accomplice? Or was Sammy a red herring, somehow having innocently left his hair there at an earlier innocuous time, a cruel trick of fate? The plot thickened, adding a chilling, unexpected twist. Detectives brought Sammy Ellison for questioning, quietly, carefully, after obtaining a new warrant. He was initially confused, then visibly defiant, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. He readily admitted to having been at Simone's apartment weeks before her death, helping Marcus move some heavy furniture, and perhaps, he conceded, he might have left some hair behind. But he vehemently, passionately denied any involvement, any knowledge in the murder, his voice cracking with emotion. His alibi for the evening of August 15, 1996, was surprisingly strong and remarkably detailed. He had been out of town, visiting elderly relatives in Memphis, a trip he had taken annually. His account was corroborated by several truthful family members who remembered his visit vividly, and even by bus ticket stubs carefully preserved in an old, dusty photo album, a mundane detail that unexpectedly saved him. It seemed Sammy's hair was indeed an unfortunate, tragic coincidence, a forensic misdirection that had wasted precious investigative time in the early stages of the re-examination, sending them down a fruitless path. This left Marcus Thorne alone, isolated as the sole perpetrator, based on the overwhelming blood evidence and the powerful, now clear motive. The police, armed with this devastating new information and Marcus's detailed past, began to construct the most likely sequence of events on that tragic, humid August night. Simone, likely at home, perhaps unwinding after her class, was confronted by Marcus, who likely arrived earlier than his stated time, surprising her. Perhaps he had discovered her secret plans to leave, finding a hidden bus ticket or a letter, or they had another argument over her increasingly independent ambitions. The argument escalated, emotions flared, spiraling out of control in the confined space. In a fit of uncontrolled rage, or perhaps with chilling, calculated premeditation born of desperation, Marcus attacked her with a knife. An everyday kitchen utensil, perhaps one he retrieved from her own kitchen, suddenly turned into a deadly, horrifying weapon. Simone, caught completely off guard, fought back desperately, valiantly, leaving the deep, raw, defensive wounds on her arms and hands, a testament to her will to survive. In the struggle, Marcus sustained a minor injury, perhaps a deep cut to his hand, explaining the tiny, almost invisible blood smear on the underside of the windowsill, left there as he possibly tried to escape, or more likely, tried to manipulate or secure the window after the heinous act, perhaps to create a false impression of a break-in from the outside, or to ensure no one saw him leave from that vantage point. He then, with a chilling presence of mind, staged the scene, overturning canvases and furniture, perhaps to further simulate a robbery, even though he deliberately left obvious valuables untouched, a critical misstep. The absence of the murder weapon strongly suggested he took it with him, disposing of it somewhere in the sprawling, murky waters of the St. Louis River, or burying it in some forgotten, overgrown corner of the vast city, a secret never to be found. He then left the apartment, only to return hours later, playing the perfectly crafted part of the distraught boyfriend, the grieving hero, discovering the horror, a performance he maintained for 2 long decades. It was a cold, calculated, and monstrous deception that had endured, hidden in plain sight, for over 20 years. The community's reaction was multifaceted, a tempest of conflicting emotions, a maelstrom of shock, anger, and profound sadness. Many felt a profound, visceral sense of betrayal, the kind that rips apart faith in humanity itself, that questions the very nature of trust. How could he? How could Marcus, our Marcus, do this? Was the agonizing question whispered on every street corner, echoing in every home, every hushed conversation. Others, particularly those who had known Marcus for years, who had seen his dedication, who had broken bread with him, struggled profoundly to reconcile the image of the selfless advocate with the brutal, calculating murderer. They grappled with intense cognitive dissonance, refusing initially to believe the undeniable evidence, suggesting a frame-up, a conspiracy, anything but the horrifying truth. The police, often viewed with deep-seated suspicion and historical distrust in the Black community, were now, ironically, both lauded for finally solving the intractable case and simultaneously mistrusted by those who, out of loyalty or denial, simply couldn't accept Marcus's undeniable guilt. The initial, long-held perception of a systemic failure to protect Black lives in 1996 was now excruciatingly complicated by the devastating revelation that the perpetrator was, in fact, one of their own, a man they had admired, championed, and held in such high regard. This made the healing process even more torturous, more convoluted, adding layers of self-doubt, collective guilt, and profound confusion to an already raw, festering wound, a scar on the community's soul. Clara Dubois, Simone's mother, struggled profoundly with the news of Marcus's arrest and subsequent conviction. Marcus Thorne had been like a surrogate son to her, a constant source of comfort, support, and companionship over the long, lonely years of her grief. He had attended every single memorial service, helped organize every fundraiser for Simone's foundation, always there with a strong shoulder to cry on, a kind word, a reassuring presence. The man who had seemingly helped her carry her unbearable grief was now identified as the very architect of it, the orchestrator of her daughter's demise. The pain was unbearable, a double betrayal that pierced her soul deeper than the initial loss, reopening old wounds and inflicting new, more agonizing ones. She spoke publicly, her voice trembling with emotion, but firm with conviction, of her profound shock, her utter disgust, but also of a strange, almost dizzying sense of vindication that, after all these agonizing years, justice was finally within reach for her beloved Simone, a truth she had prayed for relentlessly. The truth, however painful, however devastating, was finally coming to light, offering a glimmer of closure amidst the wreckage of betrayal. The intricacies of Marcus Thorne's psychological state became a subject of intense speculation, analysis, and morbid fascination for both experts and the public alike. How could someone live with such a monstrous secret for so long, not just enduring its weight, but actively, meticulously shaping a public persona built entirely on that very tragedy, on his victim's memory? Psychologists and criminal profilers weighed in, suggesting a chilling form of narcissistic psychopathy, where the individual inherently lacks empathy, is capable of profound, sustained deception, and even, disturbingly, derives a perverse, sick satisfaction from manipulating public perception and controlling the narrative. His tireless activism, rather than being a genuine expression of remorse, could have been a meticulously constructed means to control the narrative, to deflect any lingering suspicion away from himself, to keep himself intimately close to the ongoing investigation, perhaps even to subtly influence its direction. He cultivated an image of the perfect victim, the perfect advocate, thereby effectively insulating himself from any serious, sustained scrutiny, becoming immune to doubt. The constant public spotlight on the case, which he actively sought and courted, inadvertently worked in his favor, making him seem beyond reproach, but tragic figure rather than a culpable one. This twisted psychological game had played out for 2 long decades, a chilling, deeply unsettling testament to the dark, unfathomable depths of human capacity for evil and deception. The details of the crime, re-examined with meticulous precision, continue to reveal the brutal and profoundly personal nature of the attack. The sheer number of stab wounds, far exceeding what would be necessary to simply incapacitate, the extensive defensive injuries on Simone's body, the complete absence of any valuable theft, all spoke loudly to a rage-fueled, intimately personal encounter rather than a calculated professional hit or a random opportunistic act of violence. The choice of weapon, likely a common kitchen knife, further supported the theory of an impulsive act that escalated dramatically, uncontrollably, in a moment of incandescent fury or cold desperation. The staging of the scene, while perhaps intended to mislead investigators and divert attention, was ultimately too amateurish, too inconsistent with a typical robbery or a professional hit to fool seasoned detectives indefinitely, especially with the benefit of hindsight and advanced forensics. It was the desperate, clumsy act of someone trying to cover their tracks, someone who was not a professional criminal, but rather someone consumed by personal demons, by overwhelming jealousy, by a possessive rage that exploded into deadly violence. The ripple effects of this case extended far beyond the immediate confines of St. Louis. It brought renewed, urgent attention to cold cases in minority communities across the nation, highlighting the disproportionate number of unsolved murders and disappearances that have historically plagued these marginalized areas, often due to perceived systemic neglect or lack of resources. It underscored the paramount importance of continuously advancing forensic science, of investing in new technologies, and the tireless, often thankless work of dedicated cold case detectives who refuse to let forgotten victims remain unheard, their stories unspoken. The Simone Dubois case became a stark, chilling reminder that sometimes the monster isn't lurking in the shadowy alleyways, isn't a stranger hiding in the darkness, but is instead standing in plain sight, beloved and trusted, a wolf in sheep's clothing, a predator concealed beneath a veil of normalcy and civic duty. It challenged communities everywhere to look inwards, to question narratives, to trust their instincts, and to courageously confront uncomfortable, devastating truths about who lives among them, even those they hold in the highest regard. The preliminary hearings and the subsequent trial for Marcus Thorne were fraught with an almost unbearable emotional intensity. His well-funded defense team argued vigorously against the weight of the new DNA evidence, citing potential contamination or mishandling of evidence over 2 long decades, suggesting the chain of custody could have been compromised. They also pointed vehemently to the existence of Sammy Ellis's DNA, attempting to cleverly create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury by suggesting an alternative perpetrator or even a shadowy accomplice, a possibility they hammered home repeatedly. However, the prosecution, armed with the new, irrefutable DNA evidence, Keisha's emotionally impactful and consistent testimony regarding Simone's firm intent to leave Marcus, and a meticulous reevaluation of Marcus's original, now contradictory police statements, built an overwhelmingly compelling and devastating case. They meticulously outlined how Marcus's narrative of discovering the body and his subsequent 2-decade-long public persona were carefully constructed, a calculated performance designed to divert suspicion away from himself. The blood on the windowsill, particularly its unique exterior location, was a key, irrefutable piece of forensic evidence that was almost impossible to explain innocently, given his consistent testimony of never touching or going near that specific part of the window, let alone being injured there. The collective memories of that tragic August night, once hazy and distant, softened by the relentless passage of time, were brought back into sharp, agonizing focus during the trial. The oppressive heat, the thick humidity, the pervasive, unnatural silence broken only by the sudden, terrifying eruption of police sirens, the fearful whispers of concerned neighbors. All those sensory details that had been dimmed and obscured by time were now vividly reanimated, brought to agonizing life in the stark, sterile courtroom. For Clara Dubois, the unbearable thought of her daughter's final moments, struggling desperately against a man she loved, a man she implicitly trusted, was a torment that no mother should ever be forced to endure. The vibrant colors of Simone's paintings, which once symbolized her hope, her dreams, her boundless creativity, now carried a new, tragic weight. Each brushstroke a poignant testament to a beautiful life brutally cut short. The community, still grappling with the immense emotional fallout of the betrayal, began to attend the court proceedings in droves, packing the public gallery, seeking answers, desperately seeking closure, and perhaps seeking some measure of understanding for the incomprehensible acts of one they had once held in such high regard. The psychological impact on the community was immense, leaving a lasting legacy of profound distrust and a deep, unsettling sense of vulnerability. It reinforced the painful, chilling lesson that evil can often wear the most charming of disguises, can hide behind the most convincing of smiles, making it all the more insidious, all the more difficult, and all the more devastating to detect. The trial would be long, emotionally draining for all involved, and would force everyone to relive the nightmare of that fateful August night in 1996, a night that forever changed the landscape of their collective memory, permanently scarring the soul of a city. The courtroom held its breath, a thick, palpable tension settling over every person present, stifling the air, making every sound resonate with unnerving clarity. Days of grueling testimony, of forensic experts meticulously detailing blood spatter patterns and the undeniable precision of modern DNA analysis, of character witnesses painting vastly different, conflicting portraits of Marcus Thorne, the grieving lover, the community pillar, the tireless advocate, the potential monster, had culminated in this singularly agonizing, climactic moment. The prosecution's closing argument was a methodical, chilling reconstruction of Simone Dubois's final terrifying hours, culminating in the inescapable, damning conclusion of Marcus Thorne's guilt. They presented a damning, almost overwhelming array of meticulously cross-referenced evidence. The irrefutable DNA match of Marcus's blood on the exterior windowsill, a location impossible to explain innocently or accidentally. The corroborated testimony of Simone's closest friend, Keisha, detailing Simone's firm, unyielding intent to leave Marcus and pursue her dreams, providing a powerful and deeply personal motive for the rage-fueled attack. The myriad of subtle yet critical inconsistencies that had finally been unearthed in his original police statements when cross-referenced with modern forensic findings and newly invigorated witness accounts. And perhaps most profoundly, the chilling psychological profile of a man who had meticulously, cruelly, and expertly crafted a public persona of enduring grief and unwavering advocacy, all to mask a monstrous, unspeakable truth hidden in plain sight. The defense, despite its valiant efforts to sow seeds of doubt and suggest alternative theories, struggled fiercely against the sheer weight of the scientific evidence and the raw emotional impact of Keisha's heartfelt, tearful testimony, which painted a vivid, agonizing picture of a jealous, possessive, and ultimately controlling man. The jury, a diverse group of St. Louis citizens bearing the immense burden of 2 decades of unanswered questions, returned after only 2 days of intense, somber deliberation, their faces a mixture of solemnity, fatigue, and unwavering resolve, their duty fulfilled. The foreman stood, his voice clear but somber, heavy with the gravity of the decision, as he delivered the verdict that would finally, irrevocably bring a semblance of justice to Simone Dubois and her grieving community, a truth that had been denied and delayed for far too long. We find the defendant, Marcus Thorne, guilty of the first-degree murder of Simone Dubois. A collective, agonizing gasp rippled through the courtroom, quickly followed by the raw, heart-wrenching sobs of Clara Dubois, Simone's mother, her decades of pain finally acknowledged, and the quiet, almost reverent murmurs of a community, stunned not just by the finality of the outcome, but by the profound, devastating truth finally laid bare after 2 long, agonizing decades of uncertainty and pain. The hammer of justice had fallen, heavy, definitive, and unforgiving, forever altering the narrative of Simone's tragic end, but leaving behind a landscape irrevocably changed. The conviction of Marcus Thorne irrevocably altered the very landscape of memory for the Fountain Park community, a scar etched deep into its collective consciousness. What was once a tale of senseless violence and an unsolved mystery, a rallying cry for justice, transformed overnight into a saga of profound, unthinkable betrayal. The collective grief, which had bound them together, creating a powerful sense of unity for so long, now fractured into a complicated, agonizing mix of anger, disbelief, and a searing sense of violated trust. The man they had admired, whose pain they had shared, whose words they had found comfort in, was revealed as the very architect of their sorrow, the source of their deepest wound. Simone Dubois, once remembered purely as a victim, a symbol of lost innocence, now had her story framed by the chilling irony of her killer's decades-long deception, a grotesque shadow that would forever cling to her memory. Her memory, though finally afforded the peace of justice, would forever carry the weight and the shadow of this agonizing, bitter truth. Her mother, Clara, found a fragile, tenuous peace in the verdict, a grim, weary satisfaction that her beloved daughter's murderer would finally pay for his heinous crime, for the life he so cruelly extinguished. Yet, the betrayal inflicted a wound that would likely never fully heal, a deep scar on her maternal heart. The constant presence of Marcus in her life for so many years, his comforting words, his performative, expertly feigned grief, all became a haunting, grotesque mockery of her maternal love, her trust, her desperate need for solace. It forced a painful reevaluation of every memory, every interaction, every perceived kindness, tainting them with the bitter taste of deceit. The St. Louis Cold Case Unit, particularly Detective Evans and the now retired Detective Miller, felt a bittersweet victory tinged with a deep sense of the heavy toll taken. Justice had finally been served, but the cost in terms of community trust, the sheer duration of suffering endured, and the profound personal betrayal was immense, almost immeasurable. The case served as a stark, indelible reminder of the evolving, tenacious nature of criminal investigation, where advancements in forensic science can pierce through the thickest veils of deception, even after decades of silence and misdirection. It underscored the relentless dedication, the unwavering commitment, and the profound empathy required to speak for those whose voices have been brutally silenced, to ensure their stories are finally heard. But the mystery, in some ways, endures, a lingering phantom in the periphery of understanding. While Marcus Thorne was unequivocally convicted, the full, unvarnished truth of that horrific night, the precise trigger that snapped, the exact exchange of agonizing words, the chilling, dark thoughts behind his monstrous actions, remains locked forever within his own heart, hidden behind a mask of denial he may never truly shed, even in incarceration. The fundamental question of how someone could maintain such an elaborate, cruel charade for so long, orchestrating a public life built on a foundation of heinous lies, continues to fascinate and horrify, challenging our understanding of human nature. Was it pure psychopathy, a cold, calculating detachment, or a gradual descent into a darkness that even he couldn't fully comprehend or escape? The community of Fountain Park, and indeed all who followed this chilling case, are left to grapple with these unsettling, profound questions, knowing that some truths, however devastating, remain eternally out of reach. And you, watching this story unfold from your own vantage point, what do you truly believe happened in Simone Dubois' apartment that fateful August night, irrevocably altering so many lives? What are your reflections on the long, torturous path to justice and the staggering, heartbreaking nature of the betrayal at its core? Can true closure ever be completely found when the truth is so profoundly devastating, so deeply intertwined with deceit? Or does the shadow of such a deception forever linger, a chilling, indelible testament to the unseen, unfathomable darkness that can reside, undetected, within the human soul, waiting for its moment to strike?